with, but my name is Mitchell Somm, and I'm the sales director at BDV Solutions. And I'm excited to be here today with Mandy Feuerbacher. And Mandy is a former U.S. consular officer, and Mandy is also the CEO of Argo Visa. And so thank you so much for being here today, Mandy. And I look forward to talking to you about immigration.
Thanks so much for having me, Mitchell. And I'm really excited to be here as well. It's always fun to do these live sessions because you never know how it's going to connect and how it's going to look. So fingers crossed that we're seeing you guys right now.
Yep, absolutely. So Mandy, could you give us a little bit of a background on yourself and tell us about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a former U.S. diplomat, consular officer, or visa officer that's more commonly known to the public. And I have spent a lot of time doing visa interviews. So in my 7 years of my career with the State Department, I have interviewed probably over 100,000 people. And so I've done every type of visa you can imagine. This includes non-immigrant visas like, students and tourists, but immigrant visas as well. So today, I think we're talking a little bit more about EW3s or EB3s. And just any type of weird scenario I have had those interviews. So I have a lot of experience in this realm.
It is definitely an interesting perspective that you have as a former consular officer, because you're the one behind the glass that's, adjudicating people's visas. And so I think it's going to be interesting for our audience to hear your perspective about the EB3 visa. And I guess obviously today we're going to be talking not about adjustment of status, but more specifically about consular processing and people that are doing this process from outside of the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I forgot to mention, in my experience, I've worked at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, China, as well as the U.S. Consulate in Matamoros, Mexico, and the U.S. Consulate in Hong Kong. And actually, when I was in Hong Kong, I spent some time managing the immigrant visa unit as the chief of the office, which means that I was basically managing all of our local staff. I saw every type of, EB3 visa, EW3 visa, as well as all of the other types of green card categories. So excited to kind of talk to you guys about my perspective on this.
And so regarding that, could you explain to us the difference in general and in a consular's perspective between immigrant visas and non-immigrant visas?
Yeah, absolutely. So non-immigrant visas are, so you are actually getting this type of visa for a specific temporary purpose. So this means, you're going on vacation to the US, you're going to Disneyland for 2 weeks, or you're applying to study at a university overseas, so then you get a student visa, and even some employment-based visas like H-1Bs or L-1s, E-2s, you're going for a specific limited purpose. And this doesn't mean that, you're not renewing your visa and staying longer than expected. That happens all the time. But it just means that your visa will terminate at the time your purpose in the US terminates. Whereas the immigrant visa is very upfront about your intention to sort of establish permanent residence and live in the United States indefinitely. Okay. And so this is a really big difference. And generally at embassies and consulates around the world, we'll have an office that deals specifically with non-immigrant visas like tourist and student and work visas. And then we'll also have another office that handles the immigrant visas just because they are so different. And actually, there are a lot of embassies and consulates around the world that will only handle non-immigrant visas because there's larger numbers of those. And then some locations that will have the one immigrant visa office.
Gotcha. So regarding immigrant visas, is an immigrant visa a green card essentially? Because I think a lot of people get confused with the terms visa and then the term green card. So with immigrant visas, are those all visas that lead ultimately to a permanent residence green card?
Yeah, and I can totally understand why it's confusing. When I first started doing this work, it was really confusing to me as well. But when you are interviewing overseas or doing, a consular processing interview, that's when you actually get a visa that gets stuck in your passport, and it's an immigrant visa, which means that it allows our border patrol when you're entering the country to know that, hey, I'm coming to the US to live. Once you get to the US, you will actually receive a green card, and that will actually be almost like an identity card telling anybody who needs to know, hey, I'm actually here permanently.
So the embassy is really in charge of like issuing that visa that allows you to enter. And then the Department of Homeland Security is the organization that actually issues the green card, USCIS and Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the thing that is really interesting about US immigration is that it's handled by two different agencies working together, sometimes not so well because there's lack of communication, but you have the Department of Homeland Security and USCIS who handles the green cards and adjustment of status. And then you have the Department of State, which handles everything dealing with applicants overseas, from interviews to visas that they put in your passport. Okay. Just to enter the country.
And so regarding non-immigrant visas, I've learned a lot about non-immigrant visas because we have a lot of clients that are adjustment of status. And so they're already here on a student visa or a J1 visa or E2 or L1, lots of different options. But regarding the non-immigrant visas, how is it different to have a non-immigrant visa? A lot of my clients have applied for a non-immigrant visa in their home country, and they've been rejected. And that concerns a lot of people because they are worried. And most of those rejections are the 214B. And so a lot of people are concerned that these previous non-immigrant visa rejections could potentially affect them. So how does that work?
What I would say to people who are worried about that, do not worry, because, if you have a 214B refusal, which is what consular officers commonly refuse under this section, it basically means that they either think that you don't have enough strong ties to your home country, or they're concerned that you might potentially immigrate to the US. And if you're considering an immigrant visa, meaning you actually want to just come right out and be like, hey, I want to move to the US, I want to be there permanently, we're basically adjudicating you under completely different standards. So even if you've had previous 214B refusals for your student visa or your tourist visa, now you're coming back to us applying for an immigrant visa and you actually qualify, we don't really, look too hard at your previous visas, because now we're looking at you under totally different standards. And we know that you're planning on going to the US permanently. So we're going to look at it totally differently. So do not worry. I've actually, in my experience, have seen applicants come through and they're applying for an immigrant visa. They're going to be in the US permanently. And we'll see that they were refused previous non-immigrant visas. And we're like, okay, like this totally makes sense, because now they're going permanently to the US and they're doing it the legal way. They want to do it the right way. And so it's actually pretty great. So I haven't really seen a lot of issues with that.
Okay. And so now let's talk a little bit more specifically about the EB3 unskilled category. EB3 unskilled, which is also known as EB3 other workers, or consulate is called EW3. This visa category only allocates 10,000 visas per year. So it's a relatively small visa category. So from the perspective of a consular officer, what are they thinking when someone comes in for an EW3 visa interview? Considering maybe they have never even seen, or obviously they've probably done a lot of student visa interviews, or maybe J1 visa interviews, or maybe even like an EB2 immigrant visa interview. But typically with the EW3, because it's so small and kind of so niche, how does the consular officer perceive the interaction?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So like you mentioned, Mitchell, we don't actually encounter a whole lot of EB3 or EW3 visas at the consulate, depending where you are. And so a lot of times a consular officer may need to kind of take the case, review what the rules are, try to figure out what's going on. So, it's really important to be well prepared if you have a consular interview in this category, because you may get an officer who's not super familiar with the category, and part of your job is to, I always think for clients, is to make it really easy for the consular officer to approve your visa. And that you can do that by being prepared. You can do that by knowing what questions may be asked, how you can be confident in your responses. And so part of it will be you helping the consular officer understand what is this visa category and what it's all about, which is sort of where Argo comes in, because our company is the first in the world to have a group of former consular officers or visa officers help clients prepare for their visa interviews. We actually have a lot of Argo officers who have EB3 visa experience. And so they can kind of walk you through the steps of, hey, these are the questions I generally like to ask. Here's, how you can prepare by answering well, because it's really, really important that you don't want to screw up this interview. Something that a lot of people don't know is that every time you go for a visa interview at an embassy or consulate, it actually becomes part of your permanent visa record. So if you've been refused 5 times before, either on the non-immigrant side or on the immigrant side, maybe they have you in pending status, each consular officer will be able to see all of the notes. So I always like to make sure that you just one and done, you get it right the first time, then you don't have anything to worry about. And this is where Argo can really kind of step in and help you and make sure you're as prepared as possible for whatever type of visa interview you have.
Gotcha. One of the biggest questions that I get, and main questions that is most commonly asked, is it possible to be overqualified for a job? This is the unskilled visa category, and a lot of people that are applying for this are educated. They have previous experience in their home countries. So it can be confusing for a consular officer, to see someone who has a PhD coming in and they're applying for as a janitor or something like that. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that this is why actually the interview process is so important. And you're asking such a good question, Mitchell, because I think that it's very possible to appear overqualified for an EB3 or for an unskilled position or immigrant visa, especially if you have a higher degree, you have a master's degree or a PhD, which is why the visa interview becomes so important. It's all about how you make the consular officer understand your particular situation and why you would be doing this job, even if it doesn't seem to fit in with your career path or your career trajectory. So that part is really important. And again, something that Argo can help you with.
Definitely. And I think honesty has a lot to do with the answer to that question, and going into your interview and being totally candid and totally open and honest about your intentions and your reasons for applying for whatever type of visa you're applying for.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with you there.
I actually just had some clients that they just left the office here. They recently got their visas adjudicated in the consulate in Santiago de Chile. And they were so happy to finally be here in States. They actually managed to get a flight even during the coronavirus, which they were very excited about. But their case was interesting to me because they got put in administrative processing, and they had 3 interviews. And the 3rd interview, after the consulate obtained the information that they wanted for their case, they did get the visa adjudication, the visa approval, and now they're here. But they were put in administrative processing. So what is administrative processing? And, does that depend specifically on which consular officer is interviewing you? Clients who have gone to interviews at consulates in different countries, and they have gotten immediate approvals. Their interview's like 5 minutes, and get approved, and they get their visa 2 weeks later. So yeah. How does administrative processing really work?
Yeah, great question. Administrative processing is actually for a consular officer just a catch-all category for something that basically says, I don't want to make this decision right now. So there's a wide range of reasons why somebody could be put in administrative processing. Maybe they want to do additional investigations into your job in your home country. Maybe they just need an extra document from you that they're waiting on. And they'll tell you at that time, hey, we need your police report, or we need your medical report, or whatever it is. So it really doesn't mean anything except to the consular officer, who knows exactly for what reason they're putting you under administrative processing. And I'm so glad that, this client was able to get their visa approved after 3 interviews. And to me, that sounds like they were very, they could have been potentially borderline. Maybe the consular officer had some doubts. They kept wanting to put off making a decision. And so our goals for Argo is that every client who at least gets prepared by a former consular officer will be able to just get their visa approved the first time, so that you're not stuck in limbo. You're not like worried, like, oh, is this going to happen or is this not? And then you can make plans because you have a future and you have things to do. Nobody has time for that,
Right. So you, as a former consular officer, you believe that if you go into that interview and you are really, really prepared for it, you have less of a chance, you are less likely to be put into administrative processing if you are going into that interview and you're prepared and you know what you're going to say and you're ready to be honest and tell the truth.
Absolutely. I think that, really nobody needs to be put in administrative processing as long as you have everything that you need, all of the paperwork, and you're ready with your responses, you're honest, you're candid. I think that the other thing that is bad about administrative processing is that it really just gives you your case a chance to be forgotten. And consular officers, we're moving between offices all the time. We're not only moving between different countries, because every few years we're uprooting ourselves and learning a new language and moving to another country, but sometimes, at the drop of a hat, our boss might say, hey, today you are going to go fill in American Citizen Services or in a totally different office. And so if that officer was handling your case and he decided to put it in administrative processing, it may just get left on a desk somewhere because he's gone off to do a totally different job. And the next consular officer may discover it, may not, but we really don't want clients to fall through the cracks. And so you want to make sure that your case is adjudicated and decided really quickly, done in just one shot, so that it doesn't, get lost or pushed off to some other consular officer. And sometimes that can happen too, is that maybe you were put in administrative processing and, you're getting different officers doing different interviews with you. And that might be because a new officer has taken over your case and he has no idea what happened in the first interview. So he wants to do it all over again. And it's just a huge hassle.
Right. Okay. So a lot of our clients have attorneys that are helping them through all the legal filings. And many times the attorneys will also offer some type of interview preparation to their client. What is the difference between the Argo interview preparation and in a U.S. attorney's interview prep that they would be giving?
Oh my gosh, such a huge difference. And I'm so glad you asked this, because after I left government service, I actually became an immigration attorney and just know a lot of other great immigration attorneys in my networking circles. And nobody knows how consular processing works from the immigration attorney standpoint. And, and you can't really blame them because they haven't been behind a visa window. They don't know how consular officers make these decisions. And which isn't to say that they don't have some experience, because immigration attorneys, in their, years of helping out clients, they know when clients get, refused or administrative processing. And so they're retrospectively trying to guess why consular officers made certain decisions the way they do. But for Argo officers, because we have all been consular officers, we speak this weird consular officer language. We know how decisions are made. And we actually used to have literally weekly meetings, all consular officers together, talking about, hey, what visas have we refused this week? What are some interesting fraud patterns that we've noticed? What are some people we're calling in for second interviews, with every officer sharing their own stories and experiences so we can all be on the same page? We just have such an insider's knowledge that immigration attorneys couldn't possibly have. They're really good at doing what they do best, which is filings with USCIS and things like that. But for us, the interview process is what we are subject matter experts in, and you really want people to help you through this process who've been behind the visa window. And so this is what we're offering with Argo, and we're so excited about it because Argo really got started because so many consular officers, while we're doing this very stressful job interviewing, over 100 people a day, and we're constantly thinking to ourselves, why is nobody telling visa applicants the truth about what they need to know and how to prepare themselves for our interviews? Right. And it was very, very frustrating for us because even as we're refusing people and giving you 214Bs or administrative processing, we don't like doing that, but we have to because it's a part of our job. So a part of your job is to do the best you can in understanding how we think, how we make these decisions. And you do that best by working with Argo so that you're prepared and it's not going to be a blemish on your visa record that you've been refused a million times because it's expensive and it wastes time and you have to stand in line. Nobody wants to go through that.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So I think that like with Argo, obviously you're getting this insider information into the visa process from a consular perspective, but even more so than that, the consular officer or the former consular officer or the Argoth, I should say, is instilling confidence. I believe I've never done an interview, but I would believe that after you have an Argo interview prep session, you will feel a lot more confident going into your visa interview. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, half of the battle is having confidence during your visa interview process. And I can imagine, why it could be so stressful for people. It's your first time talking to a US government official. They may not speak your language that well. They may not understand. And you just have this very short window. Usually, a visa interview, depending on what type, will be under, 30 minutes. If it's a non-immigrant visa interview, it could be as short as 2 or 3 minutes. So you really want to take advantage of those few minutes to really let the consular officer understand your situation and be able to easily approve your visa. I cannot stress that enough. And so during an Argo consultation, it's a 30-minute one-on-one consultation online with a former consular officer. And generally they do a series of mock interviews with you. And so, even though we're taking the time to really get to know your background and seeing potential issues that you might have to address during your interview, then we'll say, okay, now we're going to do a mock interview and you're going to be really surprised how short and quick it is, but I'm going to do it just the way I used to do it at the embassy or consulate. And so be prepared. Here's probably the things that you should bring up. Here's, all of these like little tips and tricks that are really important to know how to master it so that when you walk in, you're going to be like, okay, I know this is going to be a 2-minute interview. I've had so many clients who are just like, I don't understand what happened. I stood in line for 2 hours and I walked up and in the span of 30 seconds, I was refused and I don't even know what I did. And this is what we're here to help out with.
I see. And this is a little bit off topic, but these visa interviews, and I don't really know the answer to this, can they be done in your native language? And is it a disadvantage if you're doing the interview in your native language? That's something I've always been curious about.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what visa type you're applying for. So if you're going as a tourist or maybe you're going for this EB3 visa category, it's unlikely. We don't expect that you'll know the English language. But if you're going to study in the US for a graduate school degree, yes, or a J1, we expect you to know some English and to be able to explain what you're going to do in the US. So it really depends on what type of visa you're applying for.
Okay, gotcha. Interesting. I think that's really all the questions that I have. I hope that this was a good resource for the BDV clients that are, waiting for their visa interviews. Hopefully this encourages them to sign up for Argo and to schedule a session for themselves so they can go into that visa interview as prepared as possible, ready to go, confident, and hopefully, they ultimately get the approval. So that's the goal. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Mitchell. Oh, and I'm seeing just a couple of questions that, maybe the audience is posing. And one person said, Rodrigo said, how long before the actual interview date do we need to contact Argo for the online session? That's such a great question. What I would say is I generally recommend as soon as possible, do an Argo session today, just because what we help you do in Argo is we help you spot some of the issues that you might have, so if there are certain things in your background that, might be an issue and you might want to know how to explain it, it's better to prepare earlier rather than later. I have had clients who will sign up for Argo, one day before their actual interview, and they're really stressed and they're like, like my interview is about to come up. I would say, just give yourself adequate time to really know what the issues are and what, a actual visa interview will be like. So you also yourself can feel confident and have some peace while you're waiting for your actual interview.
Yeah, I have a few clients I think who have done multiple Argo interview prep sessions because I think they wanted that reinforcement. So I think it was really helpful for them.
Yes, absolutely. I would recommend it to everybody. And I'm really so excited about this service that we're bringing to the world, because it's really the first time that this knowledge is accessible to anybody who needs it.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Mandy, for your time today. We really appreciate it. I know you're on the West Coast, so enjoy the rest of your week and your workday. And thank you everyone here for watching. And someone's asking, how much does the Argo interview prep cost?
I think for BDV clients, we actually have a very special rate, and I believe it's $250 US.
I think that's correct. $250 for the 30-minute interview prep session.
Yes.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Mandy. I really appreciate your time today and all of your insight. I think it was very helpful for everyone who's watching. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you guys, and looking forward to helping everyone who's been watching this session, and excited to talk to you, Mitchell. Thanks so much. Talk to you guys soon.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.